All right. Good afternoon and welcome back. We are moving right along the quarter as we talk about group leadership and participation. What does it mean to be a part of a group and work effectively with one another? So before we get started on stuff for today, just as a housekeeping reminder, we're not meeting face-to-face or on Zoom next Monday. Instead, I'll post a prompt for you to complete on Canvas. Should take you as long as the class period, if not shorter, to complete, and it'll count as attendance for that. So just to keep you updated about that. So as we get started for today, I want us to be thinking a little bit about leadership and communication. I also want to remind you that you have your next assignment, the small group observation, which is an assignment where I'm asking you to observe a small group that has a meeting and you're not a member of that group. One really easy way to do this that my other class did is to get in touch with other students in the class who might be a part of clubs or activities or organizations on campus. We'll be doing a group activity later in class as a way to help you to think a little bit about this. I want you to take some time to, off the top of your head, type or write some examples of maybe clubs or activities or organizations that you're not a part of, but that you're interested in observing and writing down which those are. These should be clubs or groups that have either synchronous face-to-face or remote meetings like through Zoom or Facebook. So off the top of your head, what are some that come to mind? Maybe organizations or clubs that you've been eyeing that you're interested in, or ones that friends or people you know are a part of. Once you've done that, if you have a device with you, such as a phone or laptop, take some time to browse some of the clubs and activities offered at UU. They're kind of listed, and that gives you a chance to look into those. And I want you to find 3 of those clubs or groups that you're not a part of, but you're interested in learning more about on campus. You'll only choose one for your actual observation, but I like giving you multiple ones to brainstorm or choose from. That way, if things don't work with one of the groups you're trying to observe, you've got more options. So the ones you're interested in do not mean you have to choose that one to find out that there's a totally different group you want to see. This is just a good starting point for brainstorming and thinking through how you might complete this assignment. Give you 2 or 3 more minutes to continue looking into this. Go ahead and wrap up your initial search. It's okay if you did not find anything this time that you were interested in looking into. You'll have a lot more opportunity to brainstorm, think about this week. One thing that I really recommend that you look into is once you've made that initial contact and reached out to an organization, is to find a time that they hold a meeting that works for you. And also, I'll be posting on Canvas a little bit later a template that you could use to reach out to an organization or club or group that just indicates, hey, I'm here for a small group communication class. We're looking at how small groups behave and act. One option that you can give members of the group to is to keep the members of the group or the things that people do in the group anonymous. Sometimes people feel a little bit weirded out if they're mentioned by name in assignments. So that's a way that you can get people more likely to agree. So I just wanted to get you some time to start thinking about it. Again, this isn't due until March 6th. So you have nearly 3 weeks to continue to work on it, but definitely figuring out who you'd like to contact this week is a good idea. And then that'll allow you to set up the meeting ideally the next week and then finish out the paper the following. So a quick recap of things we went over last class. We talked about this observation assignment in a little bit more detail, some of the elements of leadership and what it means to be a good or effective leader in a group, and also how we can use leadership skills in our own groups that we're a part of. So this assignment due on March 6th, again, has that rubric and guidelines available on Canvas. We went over that a little bit on Monday. As always, I'll look over rough drafts and outlines, so feel free to send those out to me if you need some additional help. Or if you're hitting a wall and can't figure out a group to attend, I'm happy to help to brainstorm ideas for that one too. I should also mention, just kind of as a last note, that week 10, we're in week 7, the final full week of the quarter, is reserved for folks to present and share the small group observations that they did. I will be posting a schedule where you can indicate your preference for times, including times that week that you're not available to meet, in times that you might prefer to meet during that week, so that we can get everybody slotted in at times that work for them. Last class, I had you all share, what being a good leader meant to you, including an example of a leader from your own lives and some of the challenges of taking on the role of a leader yourself. One of the trends that you all brought in was that a leader is able to communicate and reach out to you, that they're supportive, that they're able to help you out long past the time that you might initially be working or collaborating with them. And the challenges of working in a group of developing skills and creating confidence and the ability to feel like you can offer your own perspective to the group are things we brought up. Remember, good leaders are rising to the challenge, are dealing with an issue, and engage with context. They understand the situation and the dynamics that tend to happen. And that a leader is oftentimes a role model, whether they want to be or not. We'll talk about this in just a minute, but leadership is also not something that's genetic. It's not something that you're born to be. There might be certain traits genetically that make you better or worse at certain qualities of being a leader. But the vast majority of leadership is about skills you develop. We talked about these different categories. Again, traits include things such as intelligence, focus, passion, enthusiasm, just general things that are good traits for a leader to have. We talked about how situational or context leadership is important. The leader for the moment. There's a crisis and somebody needs CPR to come in and save the day. Functional leadership is leadership that's focused on resolving a particular task or issue. Good example of this is if you have like a tech person or IT person come in and help you and show you how to get some of the things like the projector working. And then a transformative leader are the folks that sort of change your life, right? That provide you with the opportunity to really think about and engage in a topic in a way that you might not have. So for this class, we'll be talking about situations or contexts that give rise to leadership. We'll also be talking about some of the things that you can do to be a good leader, and particularly what it means to create a good environment in which members of a group can learn from one another and create good opportunities for collaboration. So I wanted to show you, as we talked a little bit about, this idea that leadership is not necessarily innate, but it's a set of skills that's developed. So there was a recent article that was a bunch of like scientists in psychology, genetic, and other areas who essentially had this major debate about whether or not leaders are innate or leadership skills are developed. And while there were opposing perspectives, one of the trends that did come up is that about 90 or about 70% or so of skills that leaders have are skills that are developed over time. Some of the major observations and discoveries that were made by people who realized that leadership skills are developed over time. One of them is that yes, we all have talents. We might be really good at basketball, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean we can be a good coach. We might not know the skills, or we might know the skills, we might not know how to apply and use those skills or teach those skills, right? One kind of important thing to think about if you ever take on a role as a coach or something similar is to think about that the way you learn something and you figured it out, it's not the same way that somebody else will, right? People have differences in their cultural experience and background in things such as whether they're more audio and visual or hands-on learners. Those type of learning styles play a really big role too. So just because you have talent in something does not mean that that translates into leadership. Being motivated, right? And using your experiences in a good way. You could be a good leader, but you gotta want to. Outstanding leaders of project hard work. History tells us that leaders develop skills over time. If you look through some classic examples, for instance, in your European history, there are a lot of monarchies that have not gone so well because generations pass by and there's a leader that is not so great at their job. And also the idea that things such as the importance of thinking about skills developed over time. Some people who say that leadership is born or innate point to the idea that there are certain traits or personality elements that people might be more inclined toward, such as humility. So yes, while it is true, there might be certain things personality-wise that prime us a little bit more to be leaders. It's very much a question of how those skills are used and developed and grown. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the situations or contexts that give rise to leadership. If you've ever seen the show Designated Survivor, I think it was on NBC and then it moved over to Netflix. It's a kind of funny and maybe extreme example of people put in leadership positions, right? So the main character is a member of the cabinet in the US, and there's like an attack on the Capitol and the White House, and he is like very far down the list in line to the presidency, but he is the one that survived and basically has to become president, right? And the show is very much about his own anxieties and challenges as he tries to rise into that role. So kind of an interesting and extreme example of an emergent leader. I'll show a little trailer from that show in a minute to point on some of the ways that leadership has some challenges as it relates to emergence. So different situations or types of leaders that we can see include an appointed leader, right? So an appointed leader, for instance, might be that your boss or your coach decides to make somebody the team captain. So they decide this person has this leadership role. They've decided to put them in that position. If you use something like Discord or a similar online way for communication, maybe somebody is appointed or made a moderator, right? Oftentimes an appointed leader and their credibility is very much based on the trust of the supervisor. For instance, if you really trust your boss or your coach and you know, okay, they made this person the team captain, you feel like you can trust their judgment, and by extension, make the team captain feel like they are trustworthy. But oftentimes, if we don't like our boss, if we feel like they're out of step, if we feel like they're biased or corrupt or playing favorites, right, and they appoint somebody that's like a friend or somebody that they have a good personal relationship with, oftentimes we can see an appointed leader is not very credible. So appointed leaders oftentimes are struggling with credibility because the people they're working with are not the people that put them in that position. And so they sort of have to justify why they're there. A democratic leader, right, is somebody that's chosen by the group. So there's a few different examples of being a democratic leader. For instance, when you've done activities in class, sometimes you might be nominated or the person that people in the group ask to share whatever activity you're working on, or maybe plain as goes. A democratic leader could be somebody such as members of ASEOU, right? Things such as student senate are examples of people elected and chosen by students at EOU. Similarly, we have like a faculty senate where we elect people, and you can think more broadly to political systems that elect people to positions of power. One really big advantage of a democratic leader is that you, as people in the group, either by a majority or consensus vote or plurality, have made the decision. You all have decided for yourselves who that person is that deserves to be in a leadership position. You put your faith in them, and in return, right, you feel like you're more likely to trust and defer to them because you've played a role in making that decision. Obviously, that has its limits. We see a lot of times that if you were not in the opinion that supported that person, that you might not believe or trust them very much. Another downside of democratic leadership is that the democratically elected leader is very much tethered and tied to the people that voted for them or supported them, right? That a democratic leader has to basically support the needs of people that they represent or that voted them in, or else they're going to lose a lot of their support, maybe even be voted out. For instance, in the United States, right, we'll have a recall where there's a sufficient number of signatures to get somebody potentially off of the ballot. It was attempted recently in California with the governorship, right? Was not successful in that situation. But that can be a constraint of democratic leadership, is making sure to maintain support of everybody in the group who's put faith in you in the first place. Again, an emergent leader is this idea that somebody is not elected or not appointed as a leader, but instead, due to circumstance or situation, is forced to be put in a leadership position. One really good example of this is healthcare workers in the United States. With COVID-19 and with a lot of shortages and staff, sickness, and all of those things, right? Hospital worker and healthcare worker shortages have meant that people that might have been in these kind of entry-level positions are now suddenly like supervising and overseeing and taking on a whole lot of work, right? Or maybe you have a part-time job and all of a sudden all of your coworkers are sick and you have to manage and keep everything running as the only person there. So that's another example of emergent leadership happening. I'm a big sci-fi nerd. One TV show that I really enjoyed was Battlestar Galactica, right? And the premise of that show is that the entire planet gets destroyed. People are escaping on spaceships. Kind of similar in this emergent leadership style. There's a character who's like the Secretary of Education, so she's quite a ways down the leadership ladder, but she has to become the president because she's the person of highest power that's still alive. And so it's really interesting in like TV shows, film, media, where we're drawn to characters. We're thrust into leadership positions and we watch them try to grow and wrangle with and deal with some of the challenges of suddenly having to become leaders for themselves. I think it's a kind of fun premise to think about is what does it mean for somebody to grow into being a leader? So I want to show just a little trailer from that Designated Survivor show, because not only I think is it an interesting, fun example of emergent leadership, but also pay attention to some of the things that are said about his character as he has to be put in this emergent leadership position. So I think that tells us a lot about the challenges of leadership communication.
Hello.
Hi, Daddy.
Who is this?
Your daughter?
No, that's not possible. My daughter's asleep, and I know that because I kissed her goodnight almost 2 hours ago.
When are you and Mommy coming home?
There are times when we make history.
It doesn't matter. You're going to be asleep by then, right?
There are times when history makes us.
Good night, Daddy.
Good night, little pig.
To ensure you that the same American dream, shared by our fathers, our mothers.
It's weird. Yeah, ours just went black too. Oh, Mike, what the hell is going on? I said, put the phone down. Mike, please, just tell us what you know.
Capitol's been attacked. Congress, Captain. Eagle is gone. Sir, you are now the President of the United States.
This is the most devastating attack on our country since the peace.
Any claim responsibility?
Not yet.
This guy's never been elected to anything.
Did you know President Richmond fired him this morning? Now he's the president.
Maybe he'll realize he has no business running the country.
We're in a state of war. Tom Kirkman is not going to get us through this.
Dad's scared.
That's not scared of anything.
You really believe I should step down?
I do.
You may be right. But for now,
So kind of silly, dramatic, over the top example, but I think is an interesting example of the challenges that come in emergent leaders, right? Some of the things that are said, for instance, his lack of faith or confidence in suddenly being put in the role. I'm not sure I'm ready for this either. You have the child character who is feeling very confident in him. He's not afraid of anything, pointing to the ways that individual personality traits could lend themselves to good leadership. If there's confidence in there, you know, other people who say he shouldn't be here, he's not fit to do this. So that's another challenge, right? Of being this emergent leader, is trying to figure out how you can build credibility and trust when you're put in a position that you're not necessarily set up for, or that people don't have a whole lot of faith in you to complete. So just kind of a way of thinking about different leadership situations. So there's a lot of different ways then, with these different contexts and situations in mind, that we can think about for somebody to be a good or effective leader. And I'm going to try to break these down a little bit to help us think a little bit about what makes good leadership. One of the biggest things to avoid is this idea of sort of like being a dictator, right? Of being the person that talks down to or makes fun of, or like, you know, just sits in the chair and commands everybody else to do everything without doing it themselves. Key idea is to practice what you preach, right? To be the kind of leader that does and shows the things that other members of the group do. If you have your own set of rules, then oftentimes it makes it so that those rules and guidelines of the group don't feel like they matter at the same time. So that's one major thing to avoid is sort of avoiding doing work and delegating things to other people. Another key idea is to lead yourself, right? To take on this kind of role where you're involved and engaged and thinking carefully about what it means to participate as part of the group. So, allow the things that you develop as a leader, listening closely, showing your level of focus and attention to other people, taking notes, showing care to be the things that you do as well. Taking on some of the tasks and activities that members of the group do are really big ways that you can show leadership. Another idea, being open, right? That the way that your group has gone through things in the past as a team leader or manager does not necessarily mean that they have to go that same way. So one major logical fallacy is an appeal to tradition. This is how we've done things in the past, so it's how we should do things now. Well, there are certainly situations where doing things in the past has worked and gone well, right? That doesn't mean that in every situation you should do things the same way. Maybe, for instance, there's a new way for you to practice or study for a big game or practice for an exam. Maybe your group decides that instead of doing like practice questions, you're going to do like a Jeopardy game in a way to practice for an exam. That can be a great way to learn and to incorporate new ideas. Valuing diversity, right? So we've talked about culture, gender, elements of diversity earlier on in the quarter. And the idea here is that avoiding the stereotypes or bias that we have, for instance, if you're working with a diverse group that includes folks for whom English might not be the first language, diversity really means seeing it as additive. It's not that we have to, make this, we have to somehow accommodate or make things worse overall to make everybody included. It is by adding more people to the table, we can enrich our overall understanding of the topic. Another idea here is genuine commitment, right? That you show that you're caring and are invested in the group. One of the worst types of leaders are the ones that seem asleep at the wheel. You try to contact them or reach out to them, you never hear back. Being results oriented. Remember that when you're in a group, when you're doing meetings, that meetings are not the goal. You're not here to do meetings, you're here to solve a problem or task. So really trying to focus on doing that is a big deal. When I was involved in speech and debate, right, the way that it would typically work is we'd have a team, different teams of two. So when I was at Lewis and Clark, we'd send like 3 or 4 teams to a tournament. And sometimes some teams would get eliminated out of the tournament early. And one thing that was really cool for us to watch was that when our teams would get eliminated, the folks that got eliminated would stick around and help to prepare and coach and cheer on and do work to help the other teams that we had win. And so like showing that commitment and results focus of going from, well, I didn't win, but I'm going to help other people on my team win was a group dynamic that worked really well. Showing appreciation, right? Showing, using compliments. Hey, you did a great job on this. It's a really good way to help people feel included. I find that if all you're doing is critiquing, then sometimes people don't feel confident. They don't feel good. Using strategies like the compliment sandwich. Here's a good thing. Here's the thing to work on. Here's another constructive thing. Can help people not feel despair as they're getting feedback. Leaders learn, right? There are going to be things you learn from the group. You learn by working together. You have to have that capacity for growth. Creating a plan. That could be including something like an agenda, where you really clearly write out and explain what you're going to do in that meeting. And then lastly, understanding what the roles and responsibilities and areas that members of your group have that they can focus on. Again, if you have somebody that likes to work alone and is really good at technology, great, have them work on the section of the thing. Maybe you have 2 people who are really chatty with each other, and so you break them up for a smaller group assignment. That's an example of using some of those roles as you're working with the group. One of the key goals, I think one of the things that makes leaders go well in their work is the sense of community. If you think about some of your favorite activities or groups that you've been a part of, whether they're friend groups, extracurriculars, athletics, anything else, right? There's a good chance that it wasn't just that you had a good boss or leader or captain. It's that the dynamic of everybody in the group was positive. The group leader plays a really big role in facilitating that and creating a good environment, but the leader isn't everything, right? The leader creates space whereby organically members of the group can work together and have a really fun and positive experience with each other. So this is the idea, right, that people in the group can work together, they can develop shared interests, they can create a space where they're able to function and do things with one another effectively. Again, when I was involved in speech and debate, we had this fun time where we ended up stranded with our luggage because we had a flight canceled. And so we were just like in a grocery store and we put all of our luggage in a shopping cart and we were just like wandering around waiting for somebody to pick us up. And it was very sad for us to be stuck there, but we had a really good chance of building community and commiserating together because of the environment that was positive and allowed us to communicate. When it comes to working well and showing leadership online, right? This is a skill we have to do more and more as we get stuck in having to do more meetings that are remote, using things like Zoom and so on. There's a lot of different things that we can do. First of all, make sure you've got things like your mic working, your chat working, that you know the basics. One cool thing that you can do if you're unfamiliar with like hosting meetings through things like Zoom is that you can just create a test meeting. It's a really good way to test out some of the basic stuff like how to share a screen, how to use the chat, and things like that. You might pop into Zoom meetings for classes and then discover that like hosting your own could sometimes be a little bit of a different beast. There's a lot more you have to manage and do. Clear expectations and goals, I think, are a really important thing when you're leading meetings that happen remotely. One big reason why is because people, again, are going to be in and out. They're going to be doing stuff like laundry and multitasking. They're going to have tabs open, right, as the meeting is happening. So you need to let them know what they need to do, how involved they should be. Organization is crucial. That means really making sure you're providing the agenda, setting out something like an agenda in advance, using sort of verbal reiterations as people enter and exit meetings at various times, like they have an outage with their connection and need to come in back later. Using prompts and responses, right? So really giving that good feedback when somebody addresses or responds to a point. Oftentimes people might verbally share something that's written in the chat and speak to that. And then keeping a good and positive tone. Again, when you're communicating online and using avenues like Zoom, there's a lot that gets lost in translation. Not only is it a little box that might not have video on, but it also means that things like your tone and facial expressions are a lot harder to determine. So using positivity and using a tone that it conveys the context of what you're intending to say is a really good way to make sure your communication is as clear as possible. When it comes to socialization, right? This is the idea that not only can a group leader create a good and constructive environment in which people can work together, but also that they can communicate with one another, that they can build this sort of natural rapport and relationships because of how a group is ran and hosted. Some of the ways, right, that a team can be developed, or this idea of a team being this really more cohesive sense of people who are working together. Having a good purpose. What is the goal? What are the things you're trying to do? The clear place for the group to meet. So one really cool thing to do is if you're like creating a club or activity to have like a common space, like a, like a room or area that you meet on a regular basis. Being an effective leader from within, again, showing your attention, your listening, and really applying that in your own way. Having norms and rules, for instance, a written code of conduct or agreement or contract that you have members of the group adhere to. A range of different roles, again, letting people specialize in the tasks that work for them. You might think back to Belbin's self-perception inventory and how those 9 different roles might be things that members of your group excel at. Subgroups are a really good thing that you can work on, right? You can assign or delegate and allow people within your group to specialize in certain things. You've got a symposium to host. Maybe you have people split up. You have half the group work on advertising, getting the posters and flyers out there, and the other half work on the agenda of that symposium. And then letting people resolve conflicts on their own. One good way of thinking about yourself as a group leader when conflict and disagreement comes up. I had a student in my other class who was like a gymnastics coach and had a ton of like gymnastics students who like had a lot of drama to share. Who felt not very happy in that role. Ideally, people develop the skills, communication to resolve a conflict on their own, to not have to come to you as a leader, right? And ideally, a good leader is creating that opportunity for you just to be a last resort. If you can't resolve the conflict together as a team, they come to you, rather than you getting involved in every conflict that comes up. The last thing I want to hit on before we kind of apply these skills to a problem is thinking about how the role of teams and collaboration can serve learning. So for instance, you can engage with the subject matter. Having people in the group, for instance, if you're doing a study session or prep for an exam, right, all work on that content. Counting for things like attendance, use something like an attendance sheet or something similar just to take notes on who's there. Having people who are not doing so well. Maybe you're part of a group who you have a member who's like in the corner and not engaging. Reach out to them, help them out, and you notice that maybe they need some additional support. You understand, maybe somebody's falling behind, they're not contributing, they're not sharing or offering their perspectives to the group. And then you can also, right, create these kinds of communities, including online, using things such as the chat feature or creating breakout rooms as a way that people can interact one-on-one with each other, right? The idea here being that when people are working together in a group as a leader, you can help them to learn from one another effectively. So with some of these skills in mind, I want as the second part of your attendance today for you to think a little bit about the scenario. So Susan is leading a new study group on campus for her chemistry class, but she's struggling to lead the group effectively. Based on the things you talked about, what are some things that Susan can do to create a successful team and lead a successful study group? I want you to think about prescribing and offering her some clear solutions that she could do. And then secondarily, I want you to think a little bit about what Susan could do herself to be a good leader. So take a few minutes to think about this prompt and some of the specific things, given that this would be a study group for chemistry class, that Susan could do that would help her and her group do well. Once you feel like you've reached a good point here about some of the things that Susan could do, what I'd like you to do is to find a partner or a group of three to just share and exchange your ideas about what you noticed in this group meeting and what you feel like Susan could do. For folks on Zoom, I'll create some breakout rooms for you, give you the chance to work with a few other folks on this.
Create a good way for students and members action towards and also like work from there.
Also said like someone who's looking for the next set up
And then the second one, I said
one thing I said, and then I also said make sure like
and also create like the environment.
break it up as an icebreaker.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
actually
you
what I
set it
did
up,
on
yeah,
Zoom,
but
to make sure everyone feels involved.
So you keep going down those fast
Group has space.
One thing I said is
I actually got
if he's pretty good.
Second one, and then at the end,
And
resources,
and
and then if it's an online
yeah,
call,
it's
like
like,
practice
oh,
call,
like,
stuff
yeah.
goes.
Yeah. Make sure like getting results, make sure people actually.
Reminder
Focus on that, and just, I hang out, think group, and I make sure I actually get results. Again, just allow some freedom. From that part. And then just show appreciation. So the
I've
kids
like
showing up,
asked my friends
study
to like
for
trace,
things.
but none of them are like part of any other groups or organizations. Cause like I have to like go to at least one person. Yeah, nobody's part of it.
Yeah, I don't have this. I said,
Yeah, I can't imagine. Super easy.
Yeah.
I go very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Focus on progress, so focus on like making progress on some of that mastery on making progress in this session. I also talked about she made a plan beforehand, the meeting, it might be making it to a smoothie. Fix the meetings.
Take just a sec for folks who are in the breakout. Got about everybody. So,
Exactly.
wandering around, hearing a little bit about what you all had to share for this activity. Seemed like some common things that worked well as suggestions. We're keeping a good and positive tone early on. So a couple groups mentioned the idea that, keeping things positive, being like, we're going to ace this test and do a great job, right? Keeping our spirits high early on is a really good thing to do. Again, I had an advisor who worked as a team of research together. And she started the meeting by giving us these really silly magnets that had puns on them. I had one that said no problema with a picture of a llama on it. It was incredibly silly, but it was a really good way to get us thinking about positive things and working together well. Well, also mentioned having really clear goals, creating something like an agenda, maybe a study plan. We're going to start by looking at covalent bonding, right? Be a really good way to get the group working well. Having people have the chance to get to know each other, doing things like icebreakers and other activities to acclimate everybody to the group, especially if people don't otherwise know each other, is a good idea. Also, I would add the importance of using things like breaks, right? Giving people the time to use the restroom, get a snack, do what they need to take care of themselves, so that they're not just like stuck in this tiny room for 2 hours, right? You don't want to make it torture, but you do want to make it a good space to study and focus. So to wrap up for today, we talked a little bit about how we can create a good environment for people to learn together in groups, how situations and circumstances can change the way that group members behave, and also the idea that active teamwork and involvement is necessary for good groups. So you might be doing something like a study group or something similar for yourself. So I really recommend that you apply and use some of these kind of skills to help you make those study sessions work the way you want. For next class, we'll be talking about some of the challenges and issues that can come up as we lead groups. Issues including groupthink and some of the ways that group members don't always work together well with leaders. So look forward to that for next class. Go ahead and pass forward or email me your attendance for today. Please continue to work at and think about your small group observation assignment. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And I'll see you again for Friday's class.